Hi, I'm Daniel, 34, and last Friday night, 48 hours before I was set to marry the woman I'd spent $200,000 planning a dream wedding for, my life became a 5-act tragedy starring me, my fiancé, and a guy named Chad. The rehearsal dinner was being held in the grand ballroom of the hotel we had booked, an elegant, candlelit affair with an open bar and all our closest family and friends. Everyone toasting the beginning of our spectacular future. I was feeling great, a little misty-eyed. Actually, watching my fiancée, Olivia, give a heartfelt, rambling thank you speech where she called me her rock and the man who sees her. I was already picturing the look on her face when she saw the custom-designed, hand-stitched silk wedding dress that was currently hanging in a climate-controlled vault upstairs. I'd sunk everything into this wedding because Olivia deserved the absolute best, and I loved watching her shine. She finished her speech, and the entire room erupted in applause. Then, before I could even stand up to offer my own toast, a shadow detached itself from the back wall. It was Chad, Olivia's totally platonic friend from her pottery class, a guy with suspiciously perfect hair and the kind of aggressive confidence you usually only see in infomercials. He walked quickly, purposefully, right up to the head table, pulled a small, black velvet box from his blazer pocket, dropped down onto one knee, not for me, obviously, and looked up at my fiancée. The music stopped, the chatter died. The corkscrew noise of silence was so loud it hurt my ears, and then, Chad, in a voice that boomed across the ballroom, said, "Olivia, my soulmate, this is the universe telling us to stop waiting. Will you marry me right now?" I felt the blood drain from my face, not just because of the audacity, but because of the look on Olivia's face, pure, terrified, yet undeniable delight. For a moment, I actually thought this was some kind of highly inappropriate, deeply misguided practical joke. Maybe Chad was one of those friends who takes roasting the groom to an extreme, theatrical level, but the way Olivia was clutching the sides of the head table, the sheer, panicked joy in her eyes, told me everything I needed to know. This was not a joke, this was an ambush, and I was the completely unwitting, financially invested casualty. Before I could even formulate a coherent question, something along the lines of, "Are you seeing this, people? And who let Chad in here?" Olivia spoke. She looked down at Chad, then glanced briefly at me, an expression of profound regret flashing across her features, a regret that seemed less about the betrayal and more about the ruined seating chart, and then she said, "Oh, Chad, you know I can't say no to you." She actually giggled, a tiny, nervous sound that echoed horribly in the massive room. She reached out, took the small, admittedly elegant, square-cut diamond ring from his trembling hand, and slid it onto her finger, right next to the massive engagement ring I had paid for 3 years earlier. The room, which had been silent, fractured into gasps and murmurs. My best man, Mark, who had been seconds away from taking a celebratory shot of tequila, actually spit it out onto the tablecloth. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like they were filled with concrete. All I could think about was the $200,000, the custom flower wall, the 11-piece string quartet, the 3 different cake tastings, all of it now serving as the backdrop for my public, humiliating dismissal. Chad, oblivious to the fact that he was standing in the ruins of someone else's life, pumped his fist in the air and shouted, "She said yes! We're getting married!" And then he swooped up Olivia and gave her a kiss that was decidedly more passionate than the quick peck for the photographer kisses she'd been giving me all week. The kiss was the ignition point, seeing my fiancée, my rock, the woman who sees me, being enthusiastically mauled by a pottery instructor named Chad, wearing his cheap engagement ring and my very expensive smile, finally jarred me out of my concrete paralysis. I pushed my chair back, the screech of metal on marble cutting through the remaining din of the room. I walked around the head table, bypassing the still clutching couple, and stood directly in front of them, my shadow looming over Chad's terrible haircut. My voice, when it came out, was dangerously quiet, completely lacking the emotional tremor I was feeling internally. "Olivia," I stated, forcing her to look at me, "I just need one thing cleared up before I decide whether or not to call the police, the hotel manager, or the emergency financial fraud division." She actually managed to pull away from Chad, adjusting the $5,000 diamond necklace I'd given her for Christmas. "Daniel, please, let's talk about this later. You're making a scene." "Oh, the scene was made the moment Chad dropped to his knee," I countered, looking at the entire room that was now fixed on us. The question is this: are you breaking our engagement 48 hours before our $200,000 wedding to marry Chad? She wrung her hands, glancing back at Chad, who was now preening like a triumphant peacock. It's complicated, Daniel, our hearts just connected in a way. I cut her off, my composure finally shattering. Complicated? You accepted a proposal from another man at our rehearsal dinner. That's not complicated, Olivia, that's a cinematic level betrayal. I took the microphone from the stand, my hand shaking violently. All right, everyone, I announced to the now stunned, silent room of 300 people who had flown in from all over the world. I have an announcement to make. You were all invited here to celebrate my wedding to Olivia. As you've just seen, Olivia has decided to accept a proposal from Mr. Chad here, proving that my taste in partners is apparently as questionable as the pottery he teaches. Therefore, the wedding is off. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle, then I looked directly at the hotel manager who was hovering near the entrance, looking utterly ill. And since the wedding is off, I have full control over the contractual agreements. Please inform the staff to transition this open bar from an engagement celebration to a "this guy just saved himself from a lifetime of misery" party. It's on me. Drink until you can't remember Chad's name. And as for the $200,000 budget that I have already spent on this spectacle, I glared at Olivia, who was now starting to look genuinely frightened. I'm keeping every single cent of the deposits I can recover, and I will be sending you a very large invoice for the rest. I dropped the microphone and turned to Mark. Get the tab open, we're drinking the cost of the honeymoon. What followed was not a dramatic exit, but a bizarre and strangely celebratory shift in atmosphere. Once the initial shock wore off, my friends and family, who knew perfectly well what a demanding, high-maintenance partner Olivia had been, didn't hesitate. Mark immediately grabbed the DJ, pointed to me, and then to the bar, and within 60 seconds, the mournful background music was replaced by a triumphant, bass-heavy rock anthem, and the bartender started pouring top-shelf liquor with a new, urgent enthusiasm. The 300 guests, having been forced witnesses to a train wreck, quickly decided to stick around for the demolition party. It was magnificent. The crowd swarmed me, not with pity, but with congratulatory high-fives and relieved hugs. My Aunt Mildred, who has always been notoriously sharp-tongued, marched right up to Olivia and Chad, confiscated the expensive bottle of champagne I had purchased for the head table toast, and declared loudly, "This bubbly is for survivors only." The entire event had transformed from a rehearsal dinner into a wake for my bad judgment, complete with an unlimited budget. Olivia, meanwhile, tried desperately to salvage the situation. She grabbed my arm, attempting to whisper something about misunderstandings and our future. But I simply detached myself, politely but firmly, and turned my back on her to accept a huge glass of whiskey from Mark. "The future is cancelled, Olivia," I said over the music, my voice firm. "The only thing on the schedule for tomorrow is my bank account statement." She and Chad, realizing they had lost the narrative and were now the most hated people in the room, huddled together awkwardly for a few minutes before slinking out the service entrance, looking less like triumphant lovers and more like shoplifters who'd been caught with the goods. I watched them go, realizing that the $200,000 wasn't just for a wedding, it was for a high-stakes, public intervention that had successfully saved me from a massive mistake. As I raised my glass to the cheering room, I felt an almost euphoric lightness, the weight of the last 4 years of trying to be perfect for her finally gone. The post-rehearsal party raged on until 2 a.m. It was the best non-wedding I'd ever been to. At the end of the night, Mark and I were the last ones standing, surrounded by empty glasses and the faint scent of regret and expensive linen. Mark looked at me, his eyes bloodshot but clear. "Okay, Daniel, the party saved your dignity, but now we have to handle the financial fallout. $200,000 is a lot of money to lose to a guy who teaches people to wedge clay." That was the cold splash of reality I needed. The hotel was holding deposits for the venue, the catering, and the ridiculous cake, and the balance was due in the morning. That night, fueled by residual adrenaline and an ungodly amount of caffeine, I went to war. I sat down with the contracts, the ridiculously detailed, ironclad contracts I had signed, and realized my mistake had been costly, but not total. Because Olivia and I were not yet legally married, my contracts were only with the vendors and the venue, not with her, and in the fine print of the venue agreement, there was a clause, termination by the groom due to force majeure or unforeseen calamity, which I argued a public proposal by an ex-fiancé qualified as, thanks to my lawyer brother's previous advice, required a hefty penalty, but allowed me to retain a percentage of the prepaid catering and bar funds if they could be repurposed. The next morning, I was downstairs before the sun rose, meeting with the utterly shell-shocked hotel manager. I was calm, professional, and ruthless. I showed him the contract, I showed him the engagement ring, and I showed him the evidence of the public humiliation. I told him he had an entire hotel staff and thousands of dollars worth of perishable food and liquor currently sitting in his kitchens. "We can either fight this in court," I said, leaning across the table, "or you can give me back 70% of the food and bar deposit. I'll pay your penalty fee for the venue space, and you can repurpose the remaining 30% to sell the unused inventory to other hotel events this weekend." The manager, desperate to avoid a lawsuit and a PR disaster involving Chad the pottery instructor, reluctantly agreed to my terms. I walked out of that hotel with a massive check, feeling like a high roller who just beat the house. I had lost the venue and the flowers, but I saved nearly $80,000 in perishable inventory deposits. It was a victory, small but significant, and it immediately felt better than any wedding ever could. The battle for the $80,000 was a crucial win, but the psychological war was still ongoing, waged primarily through my mother. My mother, God bless her dramatic soul, viewed the broken engagement as an act of personal betrayal against her social calendar. She called me, not to check on my well-being, but to demand a full accounting of how I was going to spin the narrative to her bridge club. "Daniel, you need to tell people that you called it off because she was emotionally unstable. We cannot let people think you were the one rejected by a man with bad ceramic skills." It took me a full 20 minutes to convince her that A, I didn't care what the bridge club thought, and B, the facts, as they stood, made for a far more interesting story than any narrative she could concoct. The real fun began when I started dealing with the non-refundable costs, namely, the custom-made $15,000 wedding dress, Olivia's wedding dress. It was a spectacular piece of work, imported silk, hand-beaded lace, and designed specifically to match the theme of our now-cancelled garden ceremony. The designer had a strict no-refund policy, and I wasn't about to just eat that cost, so I came up with a genuinely petty, brilliant idea. I contacted the designer and told them the wedding was cancelled, but I didn't want the dress wasted. I asked them to adjust the sizing slightly, not too much, just enough to make it definitively not fit Olivia, and I paid the extra tailoring fee. Then, I had the designer ship the dress, not to me, but to my sister Sarah, who is about 2 inches taller and has a slightly different frame. Sarah, who is a professional photographer, was in on the plan immediately. She took the gown, had it altered further to fit her perfectly, and then, on the day of the wedding, the day that was supposed to be Olivia's big day, Sarah showed up at the beach with her own fiancé, wearing Olivia's exact, custom-designed wedding dress for a ridiculously beautiful, high-production engagement photo shoot. I made sure the final, gorgeous, professional photos of my sister in the dress were released to the exact social media channels where Olivia was still performing her role as the wronged ex-fiancé, trying to justify her choice of Chad. The message was clear: my money wasn't wasted, and my gift had been repurposed for someone who actually appreciated it. Olivia called me 5 minutes after the first photo went live, her voice high and screechy. "You gave my dress to your sister? That's theft." I just laughed. "It was never your dress, Olivia. It was my property, which I generously gifted to a member of my family who I am actually celebrating. You're welcome to contact my lawyer, but I think you'll find that I bought the dress, and the universe gave Chad the ring." The line went dead. The repurposing of the wedding dress was a pure, sweet moment of victory, but the ultimate confrontation was yet to come. Despite the financial damage control and the satisfying pettiness, the central emotional question remained: why Chad? The last loose thread was the enormous, 3-carat diamond engagement ring I had given Olivia, a ring that cost a staggering fraction of the overall wedding budget and was still sitting on her finger, next to Chad's significantly smaller ceramic glass rock. I had hired a lawyer, and the position was firm. The ring was a gift in contemplation of marriage, and since she had unilaterally broken that contract by accepting another man's proposal at the rehearsal dinner, I was legally entitled to its immediate return. I scheduled a final meeting at a neutral location, a fancy but sterile coffee shop downtown. I didn't want any drama. I wanted the jewelry back. I arrived with my lawyer's letterhead and a calm, businesslike demeanor. Olivia arrived with Chad, who looked entirely too pleased with himself, wearing a tie that didn't match his jacket. We sat down, and I didn't waste any time. Olivia, I have my lawyer's letter outlining the legal precedent for the return of the engagement ring. Since the contract of marriage was broken by your actions, it is legally my property. Olivia tried the victim routine first. Daniel, you're being cruel. I'm heartbroken. This ring means the world to me. It represents our history. No, I countered, sliding the lawyer's letter across the table. It represents $40,000 I paid for an engagement that you ended with a cheap spectacle. Our history is irrelevant, the legal facts are not. Return the ring, and we can close this chapter. Chad, bless his meddling heart, decided to intervene. He puffed out his chest and spoke for the first time. Look, man, we're building a new life together. We need a clean break, and besides, she deserves to keep it. You clearly have plenty of money. Why are you fighting over a little piece of jewelry? That was the spark. I looked directly at Chad, bypassing Olivia entirely, and delivered the cold, hard truth that explained everything. It's not about the money, Chad. I'm fighting for the principle. I've spent 4 years trying to give Olivia everything she said she wanted: stability, luxury, and a $200,000 wedding. But you know what I finally figured out last Friday night? Olivia doesn't want the man who gives her everything. She wants the man who causes drama. She wanted a grand gesture, a spontaneous combustion of passion that you, the low-effort, pottery-teaching chaos agent, provided perfectly. She chose you not because you're better, but because you're cheap, you're easy drama, and you don't require her to be anything more than emotionally unstable. She traded the stability I offered for the attention your chaos provides. Olivia's face went white. Chad looked momentarily stunned, his aggressive confidence deflating like a cheap balloon. I looked back at Olivia, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The ring is coming off today, Olivia, not because I need the money, but because I need you to understand that the person who pays for the lifestyle gets to decide the terms, and you no longer qualify. With shaking hands, she slipped off my massive, glittering ring, placing it gently on the table. The small, plain indentation it left next to Chad's ring was a metaphor for my entire relationship with her. The huge space I had taken up in her life, now replaced by an empty, easily overlooked spot. I picked up the ring, pocketed it, and stood up without another word. Leaving them sitting there with their complicated hearts and their cheap, mismatched rings, I walked away lighter. The final cost of my liberation secured. The return of the ring marked the true end, but the real finality arrived when I finally received my official, formal apology, not from Olivia, but from the universe, via an unexpected piece of mail. About 6 weeks after the disastrous non-wedding, I received a very thick envelope from the wedding photographer. I opened it with trepidation, expecting a final, massive invoice for the cancellation penalty. Instead, it was a refund check for a substantial amount, accompanied by a lengthy, handwritten letter. The photographer explained in his letter that he had been so utterly appalled by the rehearsal dinner spectacle, and so impressed by my dramatic recovery and subsequent survivors' party, that he had decided to refund 90% of his fee, citing moral injury caused by the fiancé. He wrote that his creative integrity had been violated by the sheer level of public disrespect shown to me, his client, and that he simply couldn't stomach keeping the money. He declared that it was the most unprofessional pre-wedding event he had witnessed in 2 decades. He ended the letter with a truly beautiful sentence. Your dignity, Daniel, was the most beautiful thing I photographed that weekend. Keep your chin up, sir. This gesture, this unexpected, professional validation from a high-priced artist who had witnessed the entire ordeal, felt more satisfying and healing than the $80,000 I'd salvaged or the high-carat diamond I'd recovered. It was absolute proof that I hadn't just been an idiot with a platinum card who got played. I had been genuinely wronged, and my response was not only justified but admirable. It immediately shifted my self-perception from scorned fiancé to man who chose himself. I framed that letter. It hung in my new apartment, a constant reminder that sometimes the universe rewards you for standing up for your own worth, even if the reward is delivered via certified mail. As for the main players, their chaos continued exactly as predicted, and the grapevine delivered the final, glorious details of their collapse. I heard through Mark and Sarah that Olivia and Chad lasted exactly 3 months before breaking up in a spectacular, public argument, not over a grand emotional issue, but over something breathtakingly trivial. They were at a trendy tapas bar, probably trying to manufacture more spontaneous combustion. The final confrontation was reportedly about who should pay the $12 service fee to use a debit card for a bill that was only $45. Chad insisted they split the fee 50-50, and Olivia freaked out, accusing him of being cheap and lacking vision. The argument escalated quickly, turning into a shouting match where Olivia reportedly screamed, "You're just another parking anxiety, Chad. A low-effort parking anxiety." The irony was so rich and thick, it could have been served as a side dish. Chad, in a fit of dramatic pique, reportedly threw a breadstick across the bar and stormed out, leaving Olivia to pay the entire bill, including the despised service fee. She was back on the market within a week, searching once again for the man who would give her the big, dramatic life she craved, only to inevitably sabotage it when it became too stable. Her final social media post before going dark was a cryptic photo of a single, unglazed ceramic mug, captioned, "Sometimes the structure is flawed." I, however, had found my peace, and I used the recovered funds, along with the photographer's substantial refund, for something far better and infinitely more lasting than a custom wedding, the down payment on a small, weather-beaten beach cabin I'd always dreamed of owning. It was modest, quiet, and miles away from the manicured lawns and grand ballrooms of my former life. I drove there alone, in my reliable, practical, newly purchased used car, listening to the waves crash and enjoying the absolute silence. No silk gowns, no string quartets, just the smell of salt and the sound of my own thoughts, which were, for the first time in years, completely calm. I realized that the $200,000 wedding was never about celebrating love. It was a massive, glittering bribe I was trying to pay Olivia to stay, and she ultimately preferred the temporary validation and low-cost chaos of Chad to the security I offered. But by choosing chaos, she had gifted me the ultimate escape. She had forced me to confront the unhealthy dynamic I was willing to perpetuate. The only contract I had truly broken was the one I had with myself, the one that said I needed to pay a ridiculous price for affection and stability. I closed the door to my new cabin, feeling the sea breeze, and knew I had won the only thing that mattered, my life back, defined by my own terms. My freedom wasn't granted, it was bought with the most expensive lesson of my life, a lesson that cost me a fortune but saved my soul. And somewhere out there, my sister was still rocking that spectacular, custom-made silk dress at various high-end events, a beautiful, undeniable testament that, in the end, nothing of value was truly lost, except for Olivia's credibility. I was finally ready for the rest of my story, which, thankfully, involved far fewer pottery instructors and zero service fees.